This is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org. Today, in this interview, I'm honored, privileged to gain the testimony of former EPA scientist and whistleblower Michael Davis, who was fired from the EPA for trying to do the right thing, for trying to gain public disclosure of threats that the public faced from very dire issues, climate engineering and the threat from fluoridation, two primary issues. And this is what we see the system does to any who dare to expose some of the insanity that's going on within that system. In fact, I would absolutely, without hesitation, state that those agencies like the EPA that the public perceives as being a public protection agency are exactly the opposite. These agencies now, in their current form, are nothing more than an arm of the power structure designed to mask threats from the population, not to disclose them. So again, today with us we have Michael Davis, former EPA scientist, fired from the EPA for attempting to actually expose public threats. Michael, are you with us? Can you
I'm here, and I want to thank Mr. Dane Whittington and Geoengineering Watch for this opportunity to further expose government corruption and hijacking by the multinational corporations.
So, Michael, on that note, can you share with our viewers and listeners what happened to you at the EPA and why?
Well, first, I basically received a general email from a colleague named Luann Unger with regards to climate change and permitting. And I worked in the permitting branch of the Water Division in Region 5 in Chicago, and I sent a reply back to her, and the only response I got back from her was thank you. And a couple of weeks later, I was basically getting a written reprimand from my direct and immediate supervisor at the time, Mr. Pack Tiefler, and basically saying I was making malicious, false, and unfounded statements, that I was damaging the agency's reputation, and that I was undermining the policies of the administration at the time.
And this, again, there was clearly no regard for the importance or the validity of what you were trying to bring to light. It simply was used as a tool against you, the fact that it was, quote, bad for the agency.
That is correct. And there was some other correspondence, general correspondence, that basically went out to the employees who basically wanted to attend seminars dealing with climate engineering or climate change at that time, and that was under the Obama administration. And I would basically make inquiries as to whether they were going to be addressing the issue of geoengineering, and either the responses were, we don't know anything about that, or we're not going to be discussing that. And that would be the general tenor of the two comments that I would basically get back with regards to bringing that issue up. And those written responses or individuals that I would basically talk to would provide a response to management saying about my inquiries.
In essence, an attempt to suppress any effort to find out more on the subject or to discourage any investigation of the issue was really the overall trend then, correct?
Yes, that was the overall trend. But the thing is that I never knew anything about any of this. This was basically being done clandestinely without my knowledge until it was brought to my attention by my immediate and direct supervisor at the time, Mr. Pat Kiefler.
Wheels turning behind the scenes, actions being taken to, in a sense, deal with you as what the EPA might have perceived as a loose cannon because you were trying to address issues that they didn't want to address. Would that be correct?
That would be a correct statement, yes.
On the case of climate engineering and the contamination from it, when did that first come to your attention, and what were your thoughts regarding what you had uncovered?
Well, it started coming to my attention slowly but surely over time. I would say it was right around about 2008, 2009. I started basically doing my own investigation in regard to that, getting documents, articles, reading some books on that issue, and I'm basically finding out about that is some of the depositions that were basically occurring fall within the purview of the permitting that I was doing as a primary part of my employment. But what really bolstered my position on that was back in when I took some soil samples, snow samples, rainwater samples from my own property in Aurora, Illinois, and I took them to an environmental testing laboratory, and I basically had them tested for aluminum, barium, strontium, and titanium. And I even had, in 2014, a bag of stock topsoil even tested for those, as well as the pH. And over the course of time, I started seeing the pH become more alkaline, started seeing a trend upward with regards to these heavy metal fallouts, anthropogenic deposition from atmospheric geoengineering that was occurring not only in the soil, but also, like I say, in the rainwater and in the snow that was coming back, where heavy metals shouldn't even be present in those mediums. And so this bolstered my position with regards to the atmospheric geoengineering. That's the only place it could be coming from, because these metals do not occur naturally in the Earth's crust. They basically have to be mined and refined, as well as my own personal observations of seeing the solar radiation management that was occurring in the skies, sometimes for a week at a time, and other times there would be a month hiatus before they would start showing back up again. And of course, I wasn't able to see above the cloud decks when it was raining or snowing outside, but the evidence basically proves that it basically had to be going on. And so this brought solidification to my position about the atmospheric geoengineering, and I basically tried addressing that within the purview of and scope of my duty, the engineer at the EPA reviewing water reclamation facility permits, and which also basically led me to bring up serious health concerns, not only with regards to the atmospheric geoengineering that was occurring and the anthropogenic depositions from the heavy metals, but also with regard to the fluoride, because the fluoride in the water, which I also had my tap water at my house tested as well for fluoride, is that fluoride basically bonds very well with these heavy metals. They do bioaccumulate in the body, and they will have adverse health effects over the course of time. And so that's what led me to also bring up the issue with regards to water fluoridation.
Now, if I could back up for a moment, I want to remind our listeners, if you can remind them again, your job, position description at the EPA, and your credentials.
Because I have a master's degree in chemical engineering. I have a master's degree in mechanical engineering, primarily in the thermal science area. And I was an engineer, titled as an environmental engineer, and I basically worked in the permitting section, and the permitting section of the water division. Basically, one of the major things that they would do, and it was the primary part of my job duties there, was to review water reclamation facility permit, and that's was my major job duties there until I basically got fired for doing my job and bringing up the pollution issue, whether it be atmospheric or water reclamation facility fluoridation.
You are a highly trained scientist who was in a job position that we would all perceive to be to protect public welfare, and yet when you tried to do so, in summary, you were fired. After a long, drawn-out process, you were terminated from the EPA for attempting to protect public welfare. Is that not a fairly accurate summary?
That is an accurate statement in that regard, and the only thing that I could basically really conclude is this: especially not only with the anthropogenic deposition with regards to atmospheric geoengineering, but with the fluoride, and it's not a pharmaceutical grade sodium or calcium fluoride that basically is being put into the drinking water systems of this country. Is what is called hydrofluorosalicylic acid, which is a hazardous waste byproduct primarily from the phosphate fertilizer and aluminum industry, and will eat concrete. And I basically brought that up, and then the next thing I basically knew, I was basically sequestered. I couldn't have any communications with anyone other than my immediate supervisor. I could not communicate with any permit writers, nothing. I mean, I just was completely shut down and from any communications whatsoever, and everything had to go through my immediate and direct supervisor at the time, Mr. Scott Ireland.
So in essence, the moment that it became evident to EPA hierarchy that you were asking questions, doing investigations, of course, from your standpoint, for the public good, without question, but the moment that you were poking around in places they did not want you to poke around in, it's, in summary, accurate to say that EPA management immediately tried to separate you from the rest of your colleagues, to isolate you.
Yeah. In other words, they put a gag order on me with regards to communications, whether it be oral communications, written communications, physical communications, exchange with anybody. I had basically a gag order slapped on me, and that was the result of this. And I basically even sent emails to my immediate and direct supervisor, Mr. Scott Ireland, which I, with regards to the fluoride issue, received no response. I went over his head to the branch chief, Kevin Perard, and I received no response. Then I basically took it to the division director and basically received no response there. And it took me a number of prodding to basically get a response back, and basically the response back was a typical canned industrial response that, you know, fluoride is not a problem and doesn't cause any, you know, health effects and all that, and I knew that to be completely untrue. And even taking this even further with regards to my duties as permit reviewer of water reclamation facility permits, I would basically be making note to not only fluoride or other pollutants, but we had a set of criteria and tables that we would basically have to look at and make note of, and even pollutants that were being noted within the permit. My immediate and direct supervisor, Scott Ireland, would delete out any and all references to any of the pollutants that I would basically make note of, and the adverse health effects of those pollutants over and above the pollutants from the atmospheric geoengineering, deposition, fallout, fluoride. So this further just basically solidified their position that I was basically a rogue employee that basically had to be dealt with. And the only conclusion that I could basically draw from all of this is that the multinational corporations have hijacked the EPA, and not only just the EPA, but it's all the other so-called regulatory, you know, agencies, and these agencies are just nothing more than basically rubber stamps for them, because the simple fact is there's at the EPA, and I cannot confirm this because I haven't worked at these, you know, other regulatory agencies, but if the EPA is any, you know, indication, these other agencies basically follow suit. There's really no independent study basically occurring to collect independent data. The data is just basically provided to these regulatory agencies by the multinational corporations, and the agency does not act upon them. For the simple fact is that if they are acted upon, the same people at the multinational corporations are the same ones sitting on the approval board at these regulatory agencies. And I might add this, that this is not some anomaly. There are many people that basically, you could call it the revolving door, you could call it an archway, that basically pass back and forth between high-level positions at industry and high-level positions within the agencies. And because the simple fact is that these high-level positions at these agencies are political appointees, and we know that these multinational corporations basically make financial incentives, and so therefore it benefits everybody all the way around, with the exception of the biosphere that we live in and the masses of people.
If I could add credence to everything that you've just stated, I want to add a few instances from our side of this issue. We have had communications from a top scientist for the state of California with water quality that was the head of the research team studying the die-off of the Delta smelt, California, huge environmental issue. We still have his communications. We may subpoena him at some point, but in summary, what he informed us of is that the aluminum was adhered to the gills of the smelt from aluminum contamination in the waterways that was not being disclosed. And every time he tried to disclose it, he was literally beaten into submission by his superiors, much as you were. Next, Redding Environmental Waste in Redding, California, who monitors the affluent in the runoff in the Sacramento River. This is going back a number of years, was seeing massive spikes in aluminum after the precipitation events in the North State. They never disclosed that. I was in the meeting. I was asked to attend a closed-door meeting, asked to remain confidential, which I'm not doing anymore, of course. But I was shown tests by supervisors at Redding Environmental Waste that showed massive spikes of aluminum in the Sacramento River, the drinking water for the state of California, irrigation water, that was not and has not been disclosed. They've never disclosed it. Again, a cover-up. California Energy Commission, I spoke in front of in 2009, in Sacramento, passed on data to their top scientists. The purpose of that meeting was for the state of California to purchase a $200,000 spectrometer from Scripps Institute to determine the chemical composition and origin of particulates in the atmosphere, particulates of unknown origin that were costing the state 20 to 40% of its rainfall. Consider that when we have the state burning to the ground right now. That meter from Scripps Institute to determine where this material was coming from was purchased, a $200,000 spectrometer. It has never been seen or heard from since. Completely thrown into a closet or into a dumpster, gone, cover up. Michael, in summary, with everything that you've described and I've described, in fact, let me add one more piece to this puzzle. USDA scientists that I know and work with, I've done habitat restoration in conjunction with 3 state and 3 federal programs, 6 programs total, habitat restoration on a massive scale, which I was deeply involved with using my own resources, but working with government scientists whom I know in the field, corroborating what you stated about the soil pHs. We have the baselines in Northern California, Shasta, Siskiyou County. It was given to me by a contact I have in the USDA. I have the original manuals in my possession. And we know from those baselines that soil pHs have escalated here, in many cases 10 to 12 times toward alkaline, exactly as you've just stated, because of metals in the rain, like aluminum oxide, which raises the pH, massive pH changes. Is it any wonder the trees are dying everywhere? The precipitation is being cut off. The precipitation that does fall is highly toxic, killing the trees from the bottom up. None of this is being disclosed, and the EPA scientists that I've been with in the field look at me sheepishly and say, what do you want us to do about it? And they have never said a word. So here's my question to you, Michael. Given all that we've just discussed and all that you've shared, that any attempt you made to do something for the greater good, for public protection, was completely suppressed. That's been certainly our experience on this side of the country as well. Is it safe in summary to say, again, to reiterate, in fact, that the agencies the public perceives as being their protection from threats, like the EPA, are actually doing exactly the opposite? They are covering up those threats. Is that accurate?
That is a fair and accurate statement, because I have known other EPA employees. I've never met them, but I've got documentation of these other individuals that have basically tried to disclose, hazardous environmental situations. One of them was Dr. William Marcus. He was fired twice by the EPA for releasing information with regards to the toxic adverse health effects of fluoride. And the first time he basically won on the merits, was ordered reinstated. He was reinstated. The political hierarchy was basically in place. They harassed him again, sued on the merits, won, and I'm not sure exactly. I think he basically retired sometime after that. Dr. Kate Jenkins, she basically brought up issues with regards to hazardous waste in the air on that infamous day in September of 2001, and they've been relentless after her. I think she's been fired at least once over that, and I think another time, I believe, over Monsanto. And so this just basically goes on and on and on to try to basically sequester and put gag orders on individuals who, like myself, are whistleblowers and are trying to do the right thing based upon what that mantra is of the EPA is to protect human health and the environment, and that's nothing more than an out-and-out fraud, because they don't do really any of that. I think if they do it, they just have a threat of it going through just to basically make people believe that they're really doing anything of substance to protect human health and the environment. But when you look at the overall big picture, it doesn't pass muster.
In summary, again, just to drive this point home, the Environmental Protection Agency is a complete misnomer, is it not? That's
right. The only real protection that the EPA, I can say definitively, based upon everything that's happened to me, and with extension to other so-called regulatory agencies, is that the only protecting with regards to the EPA is they're protecting profits. They're not protecting human health. They're not protecting the environment.
Perhaps a term like the CPA might be more appropriate, would it not? The Corporation Protection Agency, something in that line.
Something along those lines, because all it is profits.
Now, I want to ask. Go ahead.
And to basically drive it home would be the fluoride issue in Flint, Michigan, and the fluoride issue there was it was all reported that it had to do with lead in the drinking water. Well, what the fact of the matter is, in regards to that, is fluoride leaches out lead and arsenic out of the old metal pipes, which Flint, Michigan has old metal pipes there because it's an old industrial city. And there's one remaining GM plant there that was reported having corrosion problems in the plant using the regular water, from that was provided by the water utility there. And lead would not cause a corrosion problem, but fluoride would cause a corrosion problem. And to bolster what I'm basically saying about that is two things. Mary Gady, she was in the past the regional administrator for Region 5 in Chicago, and she basically was forcing Dow Chemical in Midland, Michigan to clean up their dioxin pollution. Well, Mary Gady, it turns out, basically was given two options. Either she was going to be fired or she was basically going to resign. So she resigned. Same thing with Susan Heidman, who was the EPA administrator for Region 5 in Chicago with regards to the so-called lead issue in Michigan, she was again a scapegoat for all of that. Either she had her options, either she's going to be fired or she resigned. So she resigned. And so because they're political appointees, they're just as expendable as any of the rest of the other employees are. And so it doesn't make any difference the level of the political appointee is. The industry basically has the power, and that's I just basically wanted to bring those 2 points out because it's not just me, it's the political appointee that could basically be fired as well from their position if they basically tried doing the right thing.
I want to, bottom line is the system ostracizes anyone who tries to show enough conscience to tell or address the truth. The system ostracizes those people out of the system quite immediately. That's clear. I have a question. I want to drive this point home again so people understand the point you just made. Not only is fluoride and aluminum, not only are these toxic heavy metals lethal in and of themselves, but they're synergistic, corrosive, and toxic effects make them exponentially more dangerous still. Correct. This is what we're talking about, putting industrial waste.
That is correct, because some pollutants, now whether they're like aluminum, has a natural affinity for the nervous system, primarily the brain. Fluoride, for example, because it's in the column in the periodic chart where you would basically find iodine. Well, iodine has been lacking in people's diets for some time. So what ends up happening is fluoride is being substituted. So it starts the fluoride, the aluminum, and other toxins. Eventually, what happens is they bioaccumulate and they start disrupting the functions of the body, whether the body basically be humans or whether they be animals or fish. They eventually bioaccumulate and starts disrupting those activities, along with other pollutants that also would basically are not captured and basically stored, but basically go out into the effluent discharge from the water reclamation facility into the waters, and somewhere downstream, you basically end up having the animals and humans basically getting it into the drinking water system.
So when your testing confirmed to you that, for example, in the case of the climate engineering fallout, that was in fact descending through the atmosphere where we all get to breathe it and absorb it, when your testing confirmed that this was in fact occurring, you were obviously alarmed and did what you could to bring it to light and were punished for that, correct?
That's correct.
Now, I want to ask this question. The behavior and response of your colleagues within the EPA, obviously they realized something was wrong when your EPA management began to try to separate you from your colleagues. What was the response of your colleagues within the EPA?
Well, for the most part, I couldn't get hardly anybody to basically communicate with me whatsoever. And if I was able to get someone to basically communicate with me, they had the way that they were just basically, presenting their self had to be way off away where there's no prying eyes, very short, exchange, because I was basically viewed as almost a leper. And if they basically were caught with me, they were afraid the same fate would basically happen to them, and then they would basically be ostracized and have a gag order on them and eventually be fired. So it was like I was basically a leper. I couldn't hardly get communications from anyone other than my immediate and direct supervisor. And of course, I have no idea of exactly what management had basically sent out to all the employees. And it wasn't just the employees within the branch that I was in, but I think it was pretty well somewhat universally went out to all the employees within Region 5.
So to summarize, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I can't prove that because nobody would communicate, with me, but that's what I basically surmised. And of course, people always kind of basically looked at me with, with that kind of suspicious eye and that sort of thing, that they just didn't want to have anything to basically do with me whatsoever, even though I may have the answers or I may have good technical knowledge that they basically need. They just weren't going to get it.
If I can expound on what you just outlined for us, that I would argue is the most important part of this exchange we're having, is the most important part of your testimony. What's happening on our planet right now, the dark place that we find ourselves in, the trajectory that we are hurtling towards, certain near-term planetary omnicide, the all-out assault against the environment, human health, the entire web of life, could not happen. It could not happen without legions of honorless order followers that, unlike you, are only primarily concerned about their own personal paradigm, their own paychecks, and their own pensions. And I'm sorry if that's a very bitter pill for people to swallow who want to blame only those at the top of the food chain, the power structure, who could not do what they do, who could not carry out their agenda, if not for legions of order followers, people, again, not in any way, shape, or form like you, who was willing to take a stand. You were willing to take a stand to do the right thing. That was your bottom line, but it is not the bottom line in most of our society, and that must change. That must change, or we have no chance. Statistically, in the current trajectory, we have absolutely no chance, unless or until people in agencies like the EPA, so-called elected officials, and their so-called representatives that I know firsthand also immediately abandon any sense of honor the moment they fear their paychecks and pensions will be lost. And I know that firsthand from Congressman Doug LaMalfa in Northern California, who met with me privately multiple times, whose aides would call me at home on the weekend to express their angst at the climate engineering insanity that they knew was going on. And the moment they were told to shut up and try to marginalize this issue, that's exactly what they did. Complete about face, only concerned about their paychecks and pensions, and how incredibly counterproductive to their own personal paradigm is that. It's like someone on the deck of the sinking Titanic, only worried about perhaps gathering up whatever material possessions they could while the whole ship sinks and they're on it. Pirates on the deck of a sinking ship filling their pockets with loot while the ship sinks. How will that help them? But the fact of the matter is this. If I could finish this one point, the fact of the matter is this, and however bitter this pill is, it must be accepted and faced. We would not be in this position without legions of order followers in agencies, government, military, media, that are doing whatever they're told in order to protect their paychecks and pensions. And when someone stands up as you did, not only do they not stand up with someone that showed your courage, they literally, as you stated, treat you like a leper. And this is a core factor in why we are currently hurtling toward near-term planetary omnicide. Would you agree with all that?
I would agree with that, and they would even go further on this. The other employees, colleagues of mine, they would be allowed to go to technical conferences where I would not. if I went to a conference, I basically had to pay for it, and I would have to take holiday time off to go, which was absolutely outrageous. Even the union basically intervened, and management wasn't going to waver on it. They just did anything and everything that they could conceivably pull out of the hat to basically keep me from talking. And I went to conferences I paid for myself. And I basically tell people, I basically have gone to other venues, whether I was working at the EPA or not, and I basically ask questions or make comments with regards to the presenter and their discussion or presentation with regards to climate engineering or climate change in relation to whatever the subject matter would basically be, and atmospheric geoengineering in conjunction with that. But I wouldn't stop. I would try to get the message out as much as I could. And I was told at one conference by a colleague of mine named Russ Martin, who retired a number of years before I was forced out, that he basically told me over dinner one night that I was basically under surveillance. Well, I didn't press him on that issue, but I know that the government has monkeyed around with me on somewhat of a minuscule basis, just kind of let me know that I'm still being watched by Big Brother. And I'm going to basically continue to talk about atmospheric geoengineering and the anthropogenic deposition and the adverse health effects. Same way with fluoride. I'm going to be continuing to talk about that, even if I basically have to do it from my hospital bed. I will continue to do that to get the word out, because my ethics and morals won't let me do that. And two, I'll put it in a generic context. Us humans are supposed to be the centuries, the guardians of Mother Earth, and the strong are to be the defenders of the weak. And that's the way I look at it from my perspective. And these others want to sell themselves out for the almighty dollar. I can't help them, and neither can anybody else.
In summary, and I want to drive this point home too, within these agencies, within the agency you were a part of, the EPA, blind, unquestioning, honorless obedience was rewarded. And any other sort of showing of some attempt to actually disclose dangers to the public was penalized. Is that not accurate?
That is an accurate statement, and I know that for an absolute fact, because I know that happened to me, and I know there was a few other colleagues that the same thing happened to, that they were penalized. And the penalty would be they slowly start taking away your work, giving it to other colleagues. Eventually, don't have any work. You come in and be what I term as a chair warmer, and individuals who just show allegiance to the corporate masters. They got rewarded with promotions.
In closing and in summary, Michael, given what you know from your own testing, your own research, how grave are the dangers posed to the population by what they're being exposed to from the climate engineering fallout of toxic heavy metals and chemicals, and the synergistically toxic exposure to fluoride, fluoridated water? How grave are these dangers, in your opinion?
In my opinion, the hourglass is just about empty. It is so bad now that there's nothing to basically reverse it within any reasonable period of time. It would to basically reverse this would probably take millennia.
If there's, in addition to, of course, stopping fluoridated water, which we hope the public will understand the danger from that, but in regard to the biosphere as a whole, would you say it's correct to state that if collectively, if the public stood up, joined this battle, helped to expose and halt the climate engineering assaults, even at this late hour, in your opinion, would that be a quantum leap in the right direction?
It would be a quantum leap in the right direction, but there's other factors that also must be considered. We have the nuclear component. We have diseases, what I call are designer diseases that are out there. Whether they basically affect humans, animals, otherwise. We have a problem with the geoengineering occurring that is continuing to warm up the biosphere, that is causing a runaway chain reaction with regards to the release of sequestered methane in frozen areas of the earth, and we would almost have to return to almost an instantaneous ice age to basically stop that runaway from progressing, any further. So there are numerous other factors that have to be, considered with regards to all this. But as long as we basically have a sick, dumbed down society through vaccines, water fluoridation, mind control of the media, and so on and so forth, in my opinion, we're doomed.
I certainly agree with all that and did not mean to imply that our troubles would be over if we could expose and halt climate engineering. And I agree and thank you for bringing up all the host of other challenges that would still remain, even if we can expose and halt climate engineering. But it is my hope that with this one issue that affects virtually every aspect of the web of life on which our lives depend, and this one issue which affects every single human being, every living thing on the globe, that's been conducted by governments all around the globe, that if the populations could be awoken to this issue, if they could be brought to understand that their government, again, not just the U.S. government, but other governments all over the globe, whether actively or passively a part of these programs, if the public could be brought to understand that their children have been exposed to experiment without their knowledge or consent, an experiment from which there is no return, as you just so correctly stated, that we could at least, even at this late hour, change the paradigm, change the flavor of what we face, and at least unite populations of the planet in a common cause of overturning and exposing the tyranny that is so pervasive all over the globe. I know that's your mission, Michael, and you've dedicated your life to that mission, for which I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and geoengineeringwatch.org as well. Thanks you. We are going to do our best to circulate your testimony to the widest possible audience so that people can understand what you have gone through in your efforts to fight for the greater good, a total dedication by you to fight for the greater good. I'm very grateful for you. We'll continue to communicate with you and pass on any updates. And Michael, again, our deepest gratitude from geoengineeringwatch.org.
Well, you're kindly welcome, Dane. It was my pleasure, to communicate, with you today, and I hope the communications will continue in the future. whether it be voice or in some other medium, whether it be you and me together, or however it would basically happen, and it's going to be a concerted effort between you and me and all the other individuals that are out there that are aware of the atmospheric geoengineering, the adverse health effects due to the anthropogenic deposition of geoengineering, as well as we can't forget HARP too, that basically also plays an active role in the atmospheric geoengineering part of this, not just the anthropogenic deposition of the heavy metals.
Agreed. There's many factors to this equation. We'll absolutely continue to communicate, and I'm sure there'll be much public inquiry. Michael, again, thank you for your dedication to the greater good, sir.
You're kind of welcome. Thank you.